Connolly. Minister, I've had the advantage of having a chance to reflect on this budget and read it and reread it and read the Minister's opening statement, which is 21 pages, but it's 21 pages, it's really 22, which the error in pagination perhaps symbolises the weakness of the figures that are there on 21 pages in terms of making a fairer country. And so one couldn't but welcome first the additions to the social welfare and the additions in the area of education, money given to housing and health. And one looks at that and says, well, let's not be negative, this is very good. People have more money in their pocket. But one can only stay with that analysis if one looks at this budget in isolation. And I think the key to understanding the budget is to actually go to Budget 2018 and go to page 132. And we see that the Strategic Communications Unit is being given €5 million. Something that was supposed to be cost neutral is getting €5 million. Significantly, that cost, Minister, if you might listen, didn't appear in the opening statement of the Minister. And I dwelt on that and I thought, why does one need a communications unit? Surely the Dáil is the place to tell your message and a proper, just budget. We don't need spin doctors. We don't need €5 million to spin a story, because it should be evident from the way that we're providing services. And what I find even more ironic, if that's not a bad use of the word, one of the main gentlemen in the spin unit is the chairperson of COPE in Galway. COPE that really has been left with little hope to house the homeless people. And if we look at the figures for Galway, just to put a little figure on this, COPE worked with 369 children in 2015 homeless, 512 in 2016, and the figure is rising, Minister. I know you're very familiar with Galway. And the main man in the spin unit is the chairperson of COPE. COPE, who have to resolve to fundraising on the streets of Galway, having a sleep out and encouraging the manager of Galway to sleep out on the streets rather than holding the system to account and say, sorry, this is intolerable. And recently I had to attend a mass in relation to a funeral, and the priest read out a notice encouraging those in the church to give to the most important collection that day, which was COPE. That's what we're reduced to in Galway, a charity, the chairperson of whom was, or maybe still is, I don't know, in the spin unit of the, well, let's call it what it is rather than spin. Let's call it the Strategic Communication Unit, just in case the Lascian Corla might correct me. And so, the more I thought about this and the more I read, I realised that we have 21 pages of spin. And it's insulting to reduce a debate down to how much money we can reduce tax by, and a false debate between Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael as to whether the reduction will be in the universal social charge or in tax, or how much will go on spending, as opposed to listening to the people of Ireland who have asked us and elected me and my colleagues to this Dáil to represent them. And at every stage of my political career, they have asked for services. So if we go back to Galway again, and again a microcosm, the money here will not even keep the system at a standstill for the health service. So you have to ask the question, what is going on here? And my colleagues down here, Richard Boyd-Barrett, Deputy Boyd-Barrett and his colleagues already have referred to this, that there has been a systematic running down of public services so that money can go into the private and say they'll do better. And the message from the 21 pages is that we must not distort the market. And in fact, it's spelled out on one of the pages of his speech that the market must not be distorted at any cost. That's when he refers to NAMA as having a major role. NAMA, the organisation that has had an integral role in the housing crisis, is now being given a role in the solution of the crisis that they caused. And we talks about to avoid a distortion of the market. But the market is allowed to distort our lives and the lives of the 3 people that are outside the Department of Agriculture as we stand here in luxury. And they were there last night and they were there this morning, and they're all over the city. And what we're doing here with the housing money is simply putting money in the pockets of the landlords. And I've said repeatedly in this Dáil that there is a need for landlords. Absolutely, we do need them. But to balance the market, not to distort it, to balance the market, we need a public housing construction programme. And that hasn't happened, and we've absolutely abandoned it. And what's more, the housing assistance payment that you're now putting nearly 200 million more into is going to actively push the rental prices up. That was introduced by the Labour Party and Fine Gael before the last election. And when that legislation came in and the regulations, it said, to paraphrase, it was the only game in town for social housing. And you twisted language on its head to say putting somebody into private property was social housing. And to add insult to injury, we have a situation in Galway where one of the main auctioneers was on a primetime programme the other night and confirmed there were 15 properties only available in Galway, 15 new properties. The City Council are building 14 properties this year if they're completed, and on the private market we've 15. So you'd imagine at some stage this government would say, oh good Lord, we have a major problem here, a major emergency, and we need to deal with it. And helping the private system is just part of that for the moment, but we will send out a very strong message to the vulture funds, to the private landlords, that we have a major role in this. That hasn't been done. And then we look at gender proofing in his speech. Gender proofing is an absolute insult to the people and the families of this country that suffer from domestic violence. There isn't a mention. The Savvy report was carried out in 2002. The various organisations asked for a minimum of €1 million to carry out a review of the Savvy report. That million has never been forthcoming, but we have 5 million for a strategic communications unit. And in relation to the increase in the TUSLA budget, as I understand it, again, it will barely allow them to stand still. And Minister, if I could catch your attention in relation to the economy and the economics of domestic violence, 2.2 billion per year, 2.2 billion, and I'm told that that figure is outdated. And within that context, we have 143 safe places for women and children, and we should have 446. In 2015, 4,800 people were refused safe places, women and children. 9,712 women turned up at refuges in 2015, almost 10,000 people. Their children, over 2,000, are not even covered in the homeless figures. Now, I'd like to think that we're here in the Dáil to share ideas. I'd like foolishly and naively to think that we're here as a powerhouse of ideas to deal with these problems. And I'm here almost for 2 years giving out the same figures, and if it doesn't get you emotionally or on a psychological level, I'm hoping it will get you on an economic level, that it doesn't make sense not to deal with the domestic violence crisis, and to review this, and at the very least to come back with $1 million or a little bit more for a review. And in addition, to provide the various organisations with enough money to look at research. As I stand here, I understand that they're talking to the University in Galway to do research in relation to the effects of domestic violence, and there is no money for that. But your Taoiseach can give $5 million to a strategic communications unit. In relation to disability, 13.5% of the population have a disability of one sort or another. That's 643,131. It's a finite number, and they asked for a finite figure of a disability allowance every week in addition to what they're getting, to allow them to live independently and with dignity. In relation to the rural, hasn't happened. In relation to the rural, regional and city divide, which you're fully aware of. You know that we've had many presentations. If I refer to just one, Cólachtaí na Gcomhain agus Cólachtaí Pobal Waniha. They represent approximately 30 organisations. They're looking for a miserly 600 million per year, 600,000, I beg your pardon, per year, to keep almost 1,000 people in employment. If you compare that to what the IDA are getting, you can see who's in the halfpenny place here. And there's so many other figures that I could refer to. The most glaring is corporate taxation, and I know that I'm going to be stopped very soon, but the biggest mistruth in this Dáil is in relation to corporate taxation. And I like to quote the Controller and Attorney General rather than myself. And again, straight from his report, straight from 13 of the 100 companies with the highest taxable income had an effective rate of less than 1%. Now, what spin is going on in this chamber in relation to an open and accountable corporation tax? Finally, in relation to climate change. Good Lord, how many times do we have to say this is the last Dáil that has any chance of taking an effective action? But besides that, on an economic level, it makes absolute sense to deal with climate change. Again, let me quote people who are far more expert than me. Your own Climate Change Advisory Council suggests that fines for non-compliance for failure to meet the 20 and the 30 targets could be 3 to 6 billion. The EPA have told you that we won't even comply with our targets for 20. Stern, on an economic level, have told us it's 20 times cheaper to prevent climate change than to deal with the aftermath. And the London School of Economics, as recently as 2015, concluded that the net economic benefits, etc., for tackling climate change. None of this has been tackled anywhere in this budget. And I really regret to use emotional words, but you should be absolutely ashamed of yourself to put this budget in the guise of fairness and long-term investment.